Pornography needs to be restricted in the community, in any community in the United States. Every community ought to have the right to make this decision. In fact, every community should make this decision, and this is why. I was 15 years old when I discovered my father's porn habit. It was after midnight, and it was a school night. The blue-green glow of his computer monitor spilled from the crack beneath his door. I let myself in, assuming he was working. Instead, I found him feverishly acting upon the images that he had on the screen. It's a moment ingrained in my mind as much as I imagine that the porn is ingrained in his. Shortly afterward, my mom filed for divorce, and I branded pornography as my father's, or perhaps maybe even all men's, evil vice. That is a story that I found doing some research as to why pornography ought to be restricted. But I found much more information other than just one story of one girl who happened to catch her father viewing pornography. As I looked into a certain article called Porn Debate, Is It Harmful? They gave me some very interesting facts. The first one was that 1/3 of men who are stressed tend to look at pornography. Then they said that approximately 1/5 of men who are lonely also look at pornography. Now, stress and loneliness are two emotions, and what they then said is that when men who are experiencing these emotions act on these emotions by viewing pornography, these same men tend to experience relationship problems, whether they are married, in a dating relationship, or whatever it may be. When they acted upon these emotions by viewing pornography, problems were created. So what? That's only two sources of information. So I continued digging. I found authors like Dr. Fagan, Ann Tolley, and also an article informing women on porn habits of men. And all of these articles had very similar things to say, whether it was the top 10 list of things that pornography does, or top 10 reasons why porn is toxic. They all had similar things. They said, specifically in even younger men, that viewing pornography can lead to shame and guilt, which can then be a detriment to the self-confidence of young men, which ultimately can lead to very aggressive and detrimental actions to themselves or those around them. Another thing that they were saying was that when someone views pornography, certain chemicals are released in the brain and in the body. What happens is that these chemicals are very similar chemicals that a man might experience with his wife when they're in the bedroom together. Obviously, these chemicals feel good because babies keep being born. But what this does is that when these chemicals are released, the brain and body become addicted to them. Obviously, they feel good because sex is a natural part of life that can be very fulfilling. And so when these chemicals are released and this addiction is formed, it can be very detrimental to relationships because this addiction is formed with an artificial bond to images seen on a screen, which in turn leads to unfulfillment in marital and other relationships found in life, which unfulfillment can lead to marital rifts, and ultimately rifts in marriages can destroy families by divorce. Another thing that I found from all of these same articles was that viewing pornography can greatly affect one's moral standards. This is scary, because as I looked at this, what they were saying was that a person can start at point A on a moral scale and slide down to point B, C, so on and so forth, slowly lowering their standard of how they view people and their own life and actions morally. What they said was as they lowered their standards, their sexual standards were lowered as well. Things like rape and sexual abuse weren't seen as bad or harmful. In fact, they were probably more generally accepted and were okay with that. Ultimately, as we look at some of these consequences, the addiction, the artificial bonds, the dehumanization through these bonds, the shame, the destruction of families, all of these gradually lead to one ultimate worldwide consequence. Because porn is not just something that people either in Michigan or Indiana or wherever it may be, struggle with. It's a worldwide industry. So, because it is a worldwide industry, there's a worldwide consequence. This consequence is known as prostitution and trafficking. Now, you might ask, okay, so you have some information about how pornography affects an individual, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to go out and buy a woman or pay for a woman just to have sex with her. However, it may not directly mean that, but very much so indirectly it does. As I was looking at another article that I found put on by an organization called Fight the New Drug, and the drug they were referring to as pornography, they addressed some of the issues as before, namely the lowering of a moral standard. But one thing they also added in was that the addiction to pornography will always be increasing. The addiction to these chemicals being released will always be increasing as well. What that leads to with this increase of addiction and need and desire for sexual gratification and these lower moral standards, it pinpoints at an inevitability for trafficking. Because when men, or women for that matter, strongly are desiring sexual gratification and their moral standards are lowering increasingly, they're going to ultimately lead to having casual sex with people they may not even know, or they might even force people to have sex. This is an incredible problem, all caused by pornography, something that is so easily accessed on the internet, for goodness sakes, and the internet is everywhere now. This is why communities in the United States and even worldwide ought to be able to restrict the access to pornography. It destroys individuals, it destroys families, and ultimately hurts everybody around them. Here are my speaker notes, and the excerpt from the story that I read earlier is right here. And then here is my full sentence outline. It printed kind of funny, so it's front and back. And then my bibliography printed funny too, but here's my bibliography.